Hi, it's Dr. Sandra Lora Cremers, one of the surgeons here at Visionary Eye Doctors. Thank you for joining us for our podcast, The EYE Show, where we generally talk mostly about eye-related issues and health in general. But I wanted to just kind of say thank you to all our veterans out there that have really sacrificed their life for us over the years. I remember when I wasn't born in this country. I was born in Bolivia, South America. And so I grew up not necessarily understanding the sacrifice that Americans had made for the entire world in World War II until after I was married. And I married a Dutchman from the Netherlands. And when I went to visit his family for the first time, they constantly thanked me for being American. And I was like, why? I didn't understand. I didn't do anything. And they said if it hadn't been for America, we would be living under Nazi Germany. And so the area that I was visiting was under occupation, and many of them, including my father-in-law, almost starved, really was very, very hungry because of what was happening with the invasion of the Nazis in Europe, and specifically the Netherlands. Many of you know about Anne Frank and the whole story of what's happened. So I was surprised by how many people thanked me for being American. And it was quite interesting because we know there's a huge anti-American sentiment around the world, but I love to really think about how thankful I am to all our veterans. The owner of this practice, Dr. Martinez, has a beautiful story of how he learned to appreciate America. He was born in Colombia, South America, and he was taught that America was, he would say, an evil empire. He was brought up in a very, very poor situation, and he was told that the reason why they were poor is because America was so he would say, probably greedy. So when he turned about 19, he decided to see this evil empire for himself. He came to America. He saw what was going on, and he said, this is not an evil empire. He actually enlisted in the Navy. I think he served for almost 15 years in the Navy, and one of the most patriotic men I've ever met is Dr. Martinez, because he saw that if you just work hard in the United States, you have the ability to do so much because it's a free country. Unlike China and Venezuela and Cuba and many other countries, where once you're in one position, there's really little mobility. So I wanted to say thank you to all my friends who are veterans, and specifically to a dear friend who sent me this wonderful article that kind of brings to life the beauty of what people have, for me at least, kind of suffered to give us our freedoms. And I think during this year of COVID, I've specifically started to really even more appreciate the freedom that we are allowed in this country and that I hope will remain. And so to thank you to all the veterans out there and their parents that have sacrificed for us. I know my friend's father was a Navy SEAL, a Marine, and so it's kind of thank you to all of you. So I'm going to just read this. It's called "The Home Front Saves a Life." It is written by, I should have this, I think it's at the very end, hopefully I can tell you who wrote it, but it was initially, I think, written in August 18th, 2017. And I'm just going to read this because it was so beautiful. So in the night and early morning of August 8th and 9th in 1942, the life of a 19-year-old Navy signalman, 3rd Class Egnan Staples of Akron, Ohio, was saved by someone over 8,000 miles away. Serving aboard the cruiser USS Astoria, CA-34, in support of the landings on Guadalcanal, Staples and his crewmates suddenly found themselves illuminated by spotlight and under the attack by the force of a Japanese cruiser north of Salvo Island. At approximately 2,000 hours on the morning of August 9th, the Astoria, number 1, 8-inch turret was hit and exploded, sweeping signalman Staples into the air and overboard. He was dazed and wounded in his legs by shrapnel, but helped afloat thanks to an inflatable rubber life belt he had donned shortly before the explosion. More than 200 men were lost aboard the Astoria. At 6,000 hours, Staples, along with the survivors, were rescued by the destroyer USS Bagley and returned to assist the Astoria, which was heavily damaged but attempting to beach itself in the shallow waters off Guadalcanal. Those efforts failed, and the ship took on dangerous amounts of water, and finally, at approximately 12,000 hours, while Staples was trying to help the boat, he was pulled back into the water, but still wearing the same life belt. And so this is a picture of the life belt that I want to show everybody. And here's a picture of the USS Astoria, which sank, it sounds like. This is that. And so then, rescued a second time by the transporter USS President Jackson, Signalman Staples was first evacuated to New Chaldea before being given leave to return home. It was while on board the President Jackson that Staples first closely examined the lifebelt that saved him, and he was surprised to find that it had been manufactured in his hometown of Akron, Ohio, by the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, a true American company. Staples had noticed an unusual set of numbers stamped on his belt. Returning home to Akron, Signalman Staples thought to bring it along to show his mother, Vera Mueller Staples. In 2001, he wrote about what transpired next. After a quietly emotional welcome, I sat with my mother in our kitchen, telling her about my recent ordeal and hearing what had happened at home since I had gone away. My mother informed me that to do her part, in quotes, she had gotten a wartime job at the Firestone plant. Surprised, I jumped up and grabbed my life belt from my duffel bag, put it on the table in front of her. Take a look at that, Mom, I said. It was made right here in Akron at your plant. She leaned forward and, taking the rubber belt in her hands, she read the label. She had just heard the story and knew that in the darkness of that terrible night, it was this one piece of rubber that had saved my life. When she looked up at me, her mouth and her eyes were open wide and surprised, and she said, Son, I am the inspector at Firestone. This is my inspector number, she said, her voice hardly above a whisper. We stared at each other, too stunned to speak. Then I stood up, walked around the table, and pulled her up from her chair. We held each other in a tight embrace, saying nothing. My mother was not a demonstrative woman, but the significance of this amazing coincidence overcame her unusual reserve. We hugged each other for a long, long time, feeling the bond between us. My mother had put her arms halfway around the world to save me. After their miraculous story was published in the local Akron Beacon Journal, Staples and Mueller were invited to appear on CBS Radio, We the People, on October 18, 1942. On the program, Staples and Mueller spoke of the importance of supporting the war effort on both the battlefront and the home front, with Mueller saying, There are millions of women whose sons are in the fighting forces right now. We've got to help them come back, and the best way is to get into war work. 2 days later, Staples spoke at a luncheon in Akron, attended by Firestone executives, saying, We are all in this fight together, and if we all are going to win, we must all work for the final victory. Eglin Staples returned to active duty the same month. His mother, Vera, was honored by the War Congress of American History in New York in December of 1942 for her initiative, skill, and constructive aid in industry. Both survived and were reunited following the war. I thought that was so beautiful, and there's just a beautiful picture of them together. So this is them together, and I think we take our freedom for granted, but when you read a story like that, you realize how many families sacrificed for our freedom. So I wanted to say thank you to all our veterans. God bless you.